Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to a new video. In this video we are going to be showing you how to replace an HDMI port on an Xbox Series S. We've seen a few videos on YouTube of people replacing the HDMI port. However, I would like to share with you our method of replacing the HDMI port, which we think is a little bit easier and a bit more straightforward. So let's get into it. So first things first, things to remember. Doing this will obviously invalidate your warranty. So only do this if your Xbox Series S is out of warranty. And we need to remove the case first of all. So on the rear of the console, there are two, just spin it around. There are two little white plastic tabs here, which are basically just stickers, which you need to take off. Behind those are some screws. So grab yourself a pair of tweezers or a little flat blade screwdriver and just carefully pry off those little stickers like so. One that side and then one this side like so. And then behind there, as you can see, there's a couple of screws which need to come out. So the screwdriver bit you need is a T9 for these. So it's like the star 9. Off they come, like so. Now, turn the console upside down, and this bottom panel now just slides backwards, like so. And then you can lift the bottom panel away to get access to all the other screws. Now, as we are taking the motherboard out to replace the HDMI port, we actually do need to remove all of these screws. The green screws, they hold the actual white plastic case onto the metal frame. All the silver screws hold all the peripherals like the power supply onto the metal frame, and these black screws hold the heatsink again onto the metal frame. But we need to remove all of them because we are removing the motherboard. So let's do that now. So with all the screws removed, we now need to remove the white plastic casing. Now to do this, we need to flip the console back over again. But while we're around this way, just keep an eye on these two plastic lugs here on the sides. Be careful not to catch these when you're taking the top case off because they are quite fragile and they can break. So flip the console over. Easiest way I found to do this is you literally gently pull outwards like so at the rear here like this, and then the casing will literally slide off. But again, just be careful of these plastic lugs which the casing screws go into. Make sure you don't catch those as you lift that off. Okay, then on top we've got this RF shield. Got a load of dust in this one. Let me just give it a quick clean up. Right, that's the dust removed. Sorry about that. That was a quite dusty console. So as I was saying, we need to now remove the RF shield at the top here, and that literally just wiggles. Give it a bit of a wiggle and it will pop off like so. Then we're obviously getting into the console a bit more. On the front here, we have the controller Wi-Fi and sync button board, as well as the controller Wi-Fi. On the right hand side here, we have the power button board, and then to the side, we have the actual Wi-Fi, the network Wi-Fi card. All of those three need to come off for us to be able to take the motherboard out. On each of them, there's a black screw on this, the sync button board. There's 3 screws. On the power, there's just the one, and there's another 3 on the side here. So just undo all of those screws. And then to remove these boards, you literally just gently pull them towards you. So pull them upwards like so. and they pop off. There's a connector like that, it just pops off the connector. So we'll put those to one side. Be careful of the power one because it's quite small. Give it a bit of a wiggle and off it will come. And then the same for the Wi-Fi board as well. Pull that towards you and off it pops. Okay, so now we can start removing the fan and the power supply. The fan comes off. The first thing to do though is actually just remove the power supply. That literally just lifts upwards. So if you support the console with one hand, pull up the power supply and away it comes like so. Again, quite a bit of dust inside this console. And then the fan itself, there is actually a power cable there, just connected onto the motherboard. So be careful of that. Now, to take this the power cable out, make sure you actually grab the plug, not the cables. Give it a bit of a wiggle. If you do have any trouble removing it, you can get a pair of pliers. And again, making sure that you are connecting your pliers to the actual plug and not the cables. A very gentle wiggle as you're putting it upwards. And loosen it off. And then off it comes, just like so. And then the fan can come off. Next up, there's a very small RF shield here, just above the front USB port, which needs to come off. Do so by just lifting that up, and off it will pop, like so. And then we will be able to remove the motherboard. Now the way I do it is just gently lift up from the USB port, not too much pressure, and then you've got space to put your hand in there, lift up by the heatsink, and then out the motherboard will come like so. And then we need to remove the heatsink. Way to do that, flip it over, and then we need to remove this X clamp. Now there are some tools on the market that you can get to remove the X clamp. Personally, I don't think they're much cop. I've tried using them a few times, and to me they just are causing more damage to the motherboard than it's actually worth. So the way I do it is get a flat blade screwdriver and then very gently find a nice gap at the end of the X clamp, and then just very slowly, no pressure at all, just lift the X clamp off from one side. As soon as you remove one leg, the others will start coming as well. So again, just very gently. I'm putting no pressure on that at all, as you can see. Off that pops, and then we just go around. As I say, once you've done one side, it all starts coming off really easily. And then just lift off the X clamp like so. So obviously there's some thermal paste between the heatsink and the actual APU. So what I do is just gently push down on the motherboard with the heatsink this way, and then the heatsink will lift off. And you've got the old thermal paste, which we'll replace a little bit later. But for now, our area of interest is this HDMI port. So let's get into that. Let's have a look and see what we can do under the microscope. Actually, before we do that, one thing to quickly point out is we are going to be applying quite a bit of hot air around here. So there's these RF gaskets along here. Good idea to remove them, because under the hot air, they're just going to melt. Don't have to remove this far one, but certainly remove the ones by the HDMI port. They're just stuck on. So it gives you kind of free range of the HDMI port without melting those RF gaskets. Okay, so now let's get under the microscope so we can see that a little bit more close up on what we're going to do. Okay, so here we are under the microscope. Now here's the HDMI port, which we need to replace. To the left of it is the storage expansion card. Then you've got two USB ports, and then you've got, to the far right, a LAN port, a RJ45 port. But this is the little bad boy that we need to replace. There's obviously an HDMI port. There's 19 pins which take all the signal through to the port itself, and then there's a number of grounding legs which actually hold the port to the motherboard itself. If we flip it over, we can see, you can actually see the damage there to the HDMI ports, why we need to replace it. On the flip side, you can see the where the 4 legs come through, and there's actually on these HDMI ports some connectors to the top side of the motherboard itself as well. Right, now, so we are going to apply quite a bit of heat to this area to melt the solder and then remove the HDMI ports. Now, when Xboxes are manufactured, they are manufactured with unleaded solder, which has got a much higher melting point than leaded solder. So we're actually going to add some leaded solder to the pins, to the legs as well, which will help us remove the HDMI port. So what we need to start off with is a little bit of flux. So we are going to add some flux across all the pins, all the legs, and we'll flip the motherboard over and we'll do exactly the same thing on the other side in a minute. So what I'm going to do is come in with my soldering iron and my leaded solder and essentially just soak the whole area with leaded solder. Now, it doesn't matter what it looks like, this port's coming off, so we're not worried about that. Plenty of leaded solder all the way along. We do the top side of the legs as well. Get bundles of leaded solder in there. Again, we're going to clear it all off after, so it doesn't matter how neat it looks at the minute. Flip the motherboard over. Again, I'm going to apply some flux here. And then come in once again with our leaded solder. What I tend to do on this side is just let the soldering iron rest for a little while. Add some leaded solder and let it soak through. Again here. Now you're going to get some spillages around the copper. We can clear all that up later, so don't worry about that. Again, loads of leaded solder. Like so. Right, and now we're going to come in with our heat gun. We're going to apply some heat to both sides. Right, now you'll see quite a lot of YouTube videos where they will pop the HDMI port over the side of a desk and just apply heat to the back. What I like to do in this easier method is actually apply some heat to the motherboard at the top here as well. Obviously, we need to be careful of these components here. What I do sometimes is put a bit of Capstan tape across here, which protects them. As long as you've got quite a good aim with your heat gun, you won't need to do that, but you can always do that yourself and just add a little bit of tape across there. So my heat gun is 480 degrees and it's got an airflow of 70%. So we're going to come in with the heat gun. And as I say, I am just, at the minute, just heating the area, just to get the motherboard all nice and warm. Not going too mad. When replacing HDMI ports, it is kind of a bit of a waiting game and being patient. The key thing is just get as much heat in there as you can, without damaging any of the components around it, obviously, and without burning the motherboard itself. So loads of heat in here, and you'll probably start to see the leaded solder that we added starting to melt. We've got some heat that side. We're going to flip the motherboard over, and we're going to do the same this side. Heats us up. Taking special care around this front bit here, because as I say, there are some connectors just underneath the HDMI port here. So we're just giving this a nice special heat up around the front of the motherboard. Obviously heating up all the pins as well, the legs, sorry. Taking our time, no rush, nice and easy. Flip it around again. Come in with your heat gun. Turning up the heat gun, the airflow now. And we're actually going to come in with a pair of tweezers. Keeping everything, and actually warming the HDMI port itself. Constantly moving the heat gun around. And by actually heating the port itself, you're actually heating the legs as well, which then helps. As you can see, very easy to lift off, like so. Right, so now you can see all of the pads, and you can see where I mentioned there's a few little pads across the front of this Series S. So what we're going to do now is clean up all the pads, clean up all these holes, ready for the new HDMI ports. Now what I like to do is again get my heat gun again, give it a warm up again, come in with a solder sucker so we can clear the solder out of the holes for the legs. Come in with your solder sucker. Just remove the solder. Now you can do this with wick as well. I just find it easy with a solder sucker, to be honest, and quicker. But you can use wick if you don't want to buy a solder sucker. And the final one, like so. Right, so now we need to clear the excess solder away that we added earlier. So he's going to add a little bit more flux. We are going to come in with our solder wick and our soldering iron, and then just wick away the excess solder. Now, one thing I like to do is when you're wicking pads, go in the direction of the pad itself, okay? Don't wick left to right, okay? Because you're heating up the pad and you're at risk of shifting the pad. So go in the direction of the actual pad itself to wick it off. Okay, so let's give it a bit of a clean up with some IPA or some isopropyl. And again, when you're cleaning, always go with the direction of the actual pad itself. Okay, that's clean enough for now. Let's just zoom in a little bit. Like so. Oh, we've missed some solder on those end two pads. So So let's just quickly take that off as well. Like so. And then what we need to do is put some fresh leaded solder on. So a little bit more flux. Come in with your soldering iron and some fresh flux. And just add some nice fresh flux to all of the pads. Fresh solder, I should say. Make sure if you've got any bridges, just remove them. Like so. And then on the Series S, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few of these little holding pads around here. Now they're not connected to anything, but they just make the HDMI port a little bit more stable as well. So what we'll do is come along with some flux and we'll just add some leaded solder to those as well. Like so. Now, what we're going to do, we are going to, actually let's just zoom out a little bit, get the camera aligned. What we're going to do, we are going to heat this whole area up and essentially melt the solder that's on the pads. We are then going to come in with our HDMI port and drop it into place, right? Once that's nice and warm. Now, obviously, we're going to make sure we're going to be heating these little pads at the front here as well. So we're basically heating the whole area, and then we're going to come in and drop the HDMI port in. All right, again, heat gun, it's at 480 degrees. Airflow speed of now 85%. We're coming in and just warming up the whole area. Just enough to melt the solder on the pads. And, as I say, the solder, which is to the front of the motherboard there. Now you'll know when it's warm enough because the solder actually goes, well, it goes liquefied and it goes kind of silvery. But again, just take your time, no rush. Warm up the motherboard nice and warm. And then when you feel it's ready, when you see the solder starting to melt, literally come in and drop your port in place and then just hold it into place. Hold it there for a few seconds. And then you can let go. And then what you want to do is come in with a little bit more flux over the pads, like so. Grab your heat gun again, put a little bit of pressure on the rear of the port, so push down just a tiny little bit, and then come in and heat up those pads again. Moving the heat gun a little bit quicker this time, so you don't want to melt any of the plastics inside the HDMI port. And then give it a few seconds to solidify, and then remove your pliers. Spin it around and then actually have a look. And if we zoom in, what you should find is all of your legs are now soldered already. Okay, so you can see them there now. They're soldered, there's no bridges, there's no excess solder. Now what we want to do is obviously secure the HDMI port. And what I do first of all, again, let's just zoom you out, is I spin the motherboard round and then I solder the back end where the legs pop through. Again, come in with some flux. Grab your soldering iron and your solder, and then just come in. Again, holding the soldering iron to give the solder an opportunity to flow through the motherboard. So I usually do the opposites, just so I know it's level. Plenty of solder there, let it flow through the motherboard. Again, like so. Holding the soldering iron there, letting it flow through. And once again, with the final leg, letting it flow through. Now what we can do is come in and clear up that excess solder with a little bit of solder wick. Bit of flux on there. Grab some solder wick and just tidy the whole area up a bit. Come in with that IPA. Give the whole area a good clean up. Right, now let's flip it back round again. We'll give this side a clean up. Come in and give the whole area a good clean. And then what we need to do is check all the pins have soldered correctly. Now the port is nice and solid, we can put a little bit more pressure when testing the pins. Let's give it a good clean up. Get yourself a pair of tweezers. And we just need to go along each pin and give it a nudge test to make sure it is nice and secure. So solid, 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 solid. Yep, good, 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 good. Yeah. Oh, good. Right, all we need to do is just have a quick check. Let's have a quick check as well, just to make sure the solder has flowed through to this side on the legs as well. Which looks like it has. Yeah, perfect. Okay, just zoom you back out again. And there we have it. HDMI port, nice and solid. Right, so let's get it back in the console and give it a test. Right, okay, so port replaced, as you can see, nice and solid. Solder joints nice and good. So what we need to do is put some nice new fresh thermal paste on here. So let's clean the old stuff off. Oh, actually, before we put our thermal paste on, what we need to do obviously is to replace the RF shield gaskets that we removed earlier. Again, they're just glued on, so we can replace those by sticking them back on like so. Okay, just make sure they're back on. That helps any interference, any static interference that you might otherwise get. Right, so as I say, let's put on our new thermal paste. And pop that into place. Flip the motherboard over. And then we need to pop back on our X-clamp. So the trick on getting these X-clamps back on is loosely just drop it on. Make sure that the holes are above the pins that pop through the motherboard, okay? Give it a bit of a wiggle. If it doesn't move, then it's in place. All right, so gently drop it on. Give it a bit of a wiggle, top to bottom, right to left. Then you know it's kind of roughly in the right place. And then just gently push down. Do not push too hard, very gently, just pop down like so. Get our bottom chassis. Again, just double checking that the visco paste is good. Make sure there's no debris in there. Take the motherboard, put it in this way, right? So you put in the ports through the holes at the back first of all, and then dropping it down. Make sure the USB port drops into position. I have to end up giving it a bit of a wiggle like that. In it goes, it pops down like so. What you can do now is if you just turn it over and just keep your hand on top of the heatsink, hold it like that, so just pop a couple of these black screws in, then it just holds the motherboard in place. Okay, I'll tighten those up in a minute. So now we know the motherboard's in place. Get our fan, make sure it's nice and clean. Goes that way around, obviously, because the cable needs to connect in here. You can do, pop the cable in first, like so, and then position the fan, and it just drops into position, like so. Take the RF gasket from the front that we popped on earlier, like so, so it goes this way round, and put that back into position again. Like so, you can see there, kind of wraps around, so it kind of goes either side of the chassis on each end, like so. Take a power supply. Obviously, power cable connector goes to the back. It only goes in one way round. Drop your power supply in. The connectors for the power supply there and there. So make sure they're aligned. Just give it a gentle push down, like so. What you can do then, flip it over, and then you can actually start adding the silver screws back in again. Done. All right, now we need to add back on the eject button, board, power board, and the Wi-Fi board as well. Right, now just give everything just a quick visual check, make sure the fan's not moving around, power supply is good, boards are good. And get your RF gasket again. And that literally just pops back over, like so. Grab our top case. Again, just make sure you're careful of these little plastic lugs or holes at the end where the case screws goes into, because you can break them off if you are not too careful. Easiest way to put the case on I've found so far, there might be a better way. Stand the console up on its rear, okay? Grab the case, come in with the case this way. Now drop it down and then locate the USB port so it pops, it's ready to pop through the hole, okay? And then just rest it like so, if it's not on correctly, right? And then with the rear, bend it out slightly over the Wi-Fi card, which is on the right, and then the casing on the left, and then it kind of fits, it kind of goes into the right position roughly, and then just grab the whole console, use the USB port as a locator, give it a bit of a wiggle, and then on the rear, just make sure you pop the casing across the back plastic piece, and then it should fit on nicely. Okay, and you can lay it down. Just quickly check the sync button and the power button's working, and then get your green screws, pop them into the holes, and then tighten them up. And then finally, get your bottom plate. Just getting it around the right way, so obviously the holes for the screws to the back. Pop it on, it just slides in. Get your last two screws, which are your black casing screws. Pop them in. Like so, and then get your little white plastic tabs, pop them back over the screws, like so. Now I've got one final tip for you. Replacing HDMI ports. Now, as you see, you do use quite a lot of flux when replacing these HDMI ports. That flux does tend to, move around, obviously, and it can get onto these connectors that where you plug the actual HDMI cable into. So what I like to do after I replace the HDMI ports, obviously with the console, still switched off, get a load of IPA, spray it right into the HDMI ports. Don't worry if you're using loads, get it in there. Get something like a toothbrush, or you can use a cotton bud. Give it a good clean out, right? Because in case there's any excess flux that's risen up into the port itself when you've been doing your soldering. That cleans that out. Now, do it a couple of times. Give it a good clean out, like so. And that will just naturally dry off, right? So you haven't got to worry about it. I mean, if you've got some spray air, great, spray it in. If not, don't worry, it will just naturally dry off. Give it 5 minutes before you actually turn the console on though, just to make sure. And there you have it. One replaced HDMI port on the Xbox Series S. So I hope that video was useful for you. It does show a slightly different way of replacing the HDMI port. You see quite a lot of videos with people soldering the pins in one by one. That can lead to getting some bridges on the pins. Not too much of a problem because you can remove those bridges using some desoldering braid or soldering wick. However, I find this a lot easier. It looks a lot cleaner as well because there's not that excess solder left on the ports, on the pins itself. Just make sure, obviously, after you do it this way, that you actually do get a pair of tweezers and do the nudge test on the actual pins to make sure the heat gun did heat it up enough to solder them on securely. So thanks very much for watching the video. Really appreciate your view. Please, please, please give us a thumbs up because it really does help the channel out. Also, if you like these kind of videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are posting more and more videos all the time. We've got quite a few videos actually lined up for the Xbox Series S and the Xbox Series X as well coming soon. So please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks very much. Take care of yourselves. See you all again soon.